The email arrived at precisely 11:28 a.m. on a Wednesday. Something about that notification made my hands shake as I reached for my phone. I'd been expecting a message from my assistant, but when I opened it, 7 years collapsed into a single breathless moment. Victoria Harlow's name glowed on my screen with a subject line that simply read, "I need your help." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My older sister's email was formal and cold, just like her. The last time we'd spoken, she'd stood in my cramped studio apartment, designer heels clicking against the cheap linoleum as she surveyed my life with barely concealed disdain. "This entrepreneurship fantasy of yours is ridiculous, Olivia," she'd said, gesturing at the whiteboard covered in business plans and the stack of rejection letters from investors. "You're going nowhere. Come work at Father's firm like a sensible person." I gripped my ergonomic office chair, my knuckles white. The word nowhere hit me like a physical blow. 7 years later, it still had the power to make my stomach clench. I sat in my corner office on the 47th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, staring at her email with a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease. What does she want? My assistant Marcos appeared in the doorway, holding my afternoon espresso. He'd been with me for 5 years, had witnessed my rise from struggling entrepreneur to CEO of Luminary Tech Ventures, a company now valued at just under $1 billion. "My sister needs a favor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The words looked almost surreal on my screen. Victoria Harlow, the golden child, the perfect daughter, the corporate lawyer who'd followed our father's carefully mapped career path, needed something from me. The family disappointment. The Victoria who told you that your business ideas were childish fantasies. Marcos raised an eyebrow. The one who said you'd be crawling back to your family within 6 months, begging for a job? The very same. I scrolled through her message, a tightly written paragraph explaining that her law firm was representing a client who needed venture capital funding for an AI healthcare startup. The client had specifically requested a meeting with me. She was reluctantly reaching out to see if I would consider taking the meeting as a professional courtesy. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. "My name is Olivia Harlow. I'm 32, the founder and CEO of Luminary Tech Ventures. This is the story of how I learned that success isn't just about proving people wrong, it's about proving yourself right." The day after Victoria's email, I found myself in our company's main conference room, reviewing quarterly projections with my executive team. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city I'd conquered despite everyone who said I couldn't, including my own family. "Our European expansion is ahead of schedule," my CFO Rachel was saying. "Paris office setup costs came in under budget, and we've already secured meetings with 3 potential portfolio companies for next month." "Perfect timing," I said, thinking about Victoria's email. "I was planning to be in Paris anyway for the tech summit. We can combine trips." Rachel nodded, making a note. "I'll have Marco's coordinate. How long do you want to stay?" "A week should be sufficient," I replied, scrolling through my calendar. "Any update on the London situation?" My COO Jason grimaced. "Harrington Investments is still trying to poach our talent. They've offered Davies twice his current salary." I tapped my pen against the polished conference table. Harrington Investments was my primary competitor, founded by Edward Harrington, a venture capitalist who'd rejected my initial pitch 7 years ago. "Davies won't leave," I said with certainty. "He's got too much equity in our success. But let's review compensation packages for the whole London team anyway." The meeting continued for another hour, my mind occasionally drifting to Victoria's email. I still hadn't decided how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to let her feel what it was like to be dismissed and forgotten. But the businesswoman in me was curious about the client, about why they'd requested me specifically. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After the meeting, I retreated to my office and finally typed a response to Victoria. "I can spare 30 minutes next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Have your client come to my office. Send their pitch deck in advance." Short, professional, non-committal. I pressed send before I could second-guess myself. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother, Alex. Did Victoria really email you about a client meeting? She's been in a state all week about having to ask you for anything. I smiled despite myself. Alex had always been the family mediator, the only one who'd supported my decision to turn down the position at my father's law firm to start my own company. He still worked there, but as an environmental lawyer rather than corporate, a small rebellion that our parents had eventually accepted. She did. I texted back. Apparently her client insisted on meeting with me. This should be interesting, he replied. Dinner soon? I want to hear about Paris. Dad mentioned you're speaking at the summit. My fingers hovered over the phone. He's keeping tabs on me? Hard not to when your face is on the cover of Forbes. I set the phone down without responding. 3 months ago, I'd been featured in Forbes' 40 Under 40 issue, a full-page spread detailing my journey from rejected entrepreneur to successful venture capitalist. I'd sent a copy to my parents' house, not out of vanity but as proof that I hadn't been crazy, that my fantasy had been worth pursuing. I'd never received a response. Later that evening, I sat in my penthouse apartment, a glass of Cabernet in hand, looking out at the city lights. The apartment had cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime, but I rarely had time to enjoy it. My housekeeper spent more time here than I did. I opened my laptop and pulled up the pitch deck Victoria had forwarded from her client. Helix Health A. I was developing an artificial intelligence system that could predict medical emergencies before they happened, using a combination of wearable technology and machine learning. The technology looked promising, but what caught my attention was the founder's name, Dr. James Chen. I remembered him from Stanford. He'd been 2 years ahead of me, brilliant and intense, always working on projects that seemed impossibly advanced. We'd dated briefly during my sophomore year, before he'd graduated and disappeared into the world of medical research. I hadn't thought about him in years. I closed the laptop, suddenly understanding why he'd requested me specifically. Not because of my company's success or my reputation in the venture capital world, but because of a personal connection from the past. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. The following morning, I woke at 5:30 as usual, completed my workout with my personal trainer, and was in the office by 7:45. I had a full day of meetings before Victoria's client would arrive, and I intended to be thoroughly prepared. Dr. Chen's technology has significant potential, Rachel said during our morning briefing. The preliminary data looks solid, and the market for predictive healthcare is exploding. What's the competition like? I asked, scanning the report she'd prepared. Fragmented. Lots of startups working on pieces of the puzzle, but no one has the comprehensive approach Helix is developing. Their integration of real-time data with predictive modeling is unique. I nodded, making notes. And the team? Strong. Chen has assembled experts in AI, medicine, and data security. The only weakness is their business development side. Which is why they need funding, I concluded. What about their valuation expectations? Rachel grimaced. That's where things get tricky. They're asking for $30 million at a $200 million valuation. I raised an eyebrow. Ambitious. Especially for a pre-revenue company. She agreed, but if the technology works as promised, it could be transformative. I spent the rest of the morning in back-to-back meetings, reviewing potential investments, checking in with portfolio companies, and finalizing details for my upcoming Paris trip. By the time Tuesday afternoon arrived, I'd almost forgotten about Victoria's client. Dr. Chen is here, Marcos announced through the intercom, and your sister is with him. I took a deep breath. Send them in. Victoria entered first, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her expression carefully neutral. She'd always been the conventionally beautiful one, tall, blonde, slender. I'd inherited our mother's darker coloring and shorter stature, something Victoria had never let me forget during our teenage years. Olivia? She said with a slight nod. Thank you for making time in your schedule. Of course, I replied, gesturing to the chairs across from my desk. Professional courtesy. Dr. James Chen followed her into the office, and I was struck by how little he'd changed. Still lean and intense, with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. He smiled when he saw me, genuine warmth in his expression. "Olivia Harlow," he said, extending his hand. "It's been a long time." "Indeed it has," I replied, shaking his hand. "Stanford seems like another lifetime ago." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly at this exchange. "You two know each other?" "We were at Stanford together," I explained, keeping my tone light. "Dr. Chen was working on his medical degree while I was still an undergraduate." "James, please," he insisted, and Olivia was already developing business plans that made the rest of us look unambitious. I gestured for them to sit. "I've reviewed your pitch deck. The technology is intriguing." For the next 20 minutes, James walked me through his presentation, explaining the technical aspects of Helix's AI system, the clinical trials they'd already completed, and their plans for scaling the technology. Victoria occasionally interjected with legal clarifications, but largely remained silent, watching our interaction with what appeared to be growing unease. "Your valuation expectations are aggressive," I said when he'd finished. "What makes you confident in that number?" "Two things," James replied without hesitation. "First, our preliminary trials have shown a 93% accuracy rate in predicting cardiac events 24 hours before they occur. Second, we've already received acquisition offers from 2 major healthcare companies, but we believe remaining independent will allow us to develop applications beyond the initial cardiovascular focus." I nodded, impressed by his clarity and confidence. "And why Luminary specifically? There are plenty of venture capital firms with deeper healthcare portfolios." James glanced briefly at Victoria before answering. "Because you understand what it's like to believe in something that others dismiss as impossible. Your reputation for backing transformative technologies rather than incremental improvements aligns with our vision." Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I see," I said, keeping my expression neutral. "Well, I'm interested enough to have my team conduct due diligence. Rachel will be in touch to schedule follow-up meetings with your technical and financial teams." "Thank you," James said, standing to shake my hand again. "I appreciate you taking the time to consider our proposal. Of course, Marcos will show you to the conference room where Rachel is waiting to discuss next steps." I turned to Victoria. "Could you stay for a moment? I'd like to discuss something with you privately." After James had left, Victoria remained standing, her posture rigid. "You're actually considering their proposal? It's a solid concept with enormous potential," I replied. "Why wouldn't I?" "I just assumed." She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "That I'd refuse out of spite?" I finished for her. "That's not how I conduct business." Victoria sighed, some of her professional facade cracking. "Look, Olivia, I know things haven't been easy between us." "That's one way to put it," I said dryly. "Father mentioned you're speaking at the Paris Tech Summit next week," she said, changing the subject. "Quite an honor." "Yes, I'm delivering the keynote." I watched her face carefully, looking for signs of the disdain I'd grown accustomed to seeing whenever my accomplishments were mentioned. Instead, she looked tired. "Congratulations. That's impressive. Thank you." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering me since I'd received her email. "Why did you really bring James to me? His technology is promising enough that any number of firms would be interested." Victoria looked away, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. "He specifically requested you. Said he'd read about your success and thought you'd understand his vision." And I needed this client to work out," she admitted reluctantly. "I'm up for partner this year. Bringing in a major deal with a promising healthcare AI company would help my case." I leaned back in my chair, understanding dawning. "So you came to me because you need something." "Isn't that how business works?" she asked defensively. "Mutually beneficial arrangements?" "Indeed it is," I agreed, "which is why I'll give Helix fair consideration, regardless of our personal history." Victoria gathered her briefcase, her composure restored. "I should join them in the conference room." "Before you go," I said, "I'm hosting a dinner for potential European investors the night before the Paris Summit. You should come." She looked surprised. To Paris? Why not? You can meet some of my portfolio companies, network with potential clients. Could be useful for your partner bid. Victoria studied me suspiciously. Why would you help me with that? I smiled. Mutually beneficial arrangements, remember? Besides, it might be interesting for you to see what nowhere looks like these days. After she left, I sat in my office, staring at the family photo I kept hidden in my desk drawer. It had been taken at my college graduation. My parents standing proudly, Victoria in her law school regalia, Alex grinning widely, and me in the middle, diploma in hand, already dreaming of the company I would build. The photo had been taken before I'd announced my decision to turn down the position at my father's firm, before Victoria had called me ungrateful and impractical, before my mother had cried and my father had coldly informed me that I would receive no financial support for my ill-advised venture. I put the photo away and turned to my computer, pulling up the final itinerary for my Paris trip. The schedule was packed with meetings, presentations, and networking events, culminating in my keynote address at the summit. And now, apparently, a dinner with my estranged sister. Marcos, I called through the intercom, please add Victoria Harlow to the Paris dinner reservation and book her a room at the Four Seasons. Your sister? He asked, sounding surprised. Yes, I confirmed, and send a car to pick her up from the airport. Of course, he replied. Anything else? I hesitated, then made a decision. Yes. Call the pilot and confirm we'll be using the company jet rather than flying commercial. Already done, he assured me. 3 days later, I sat in my private office aboard Luminary's Gulfstream G650, reviewing my keynote speech as we prepared for takeoff. The jet had been a recent acquisition, a necessary tool for a company expanding globally rather than a luxury, though it certainly felt luxurious. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Flight delayed. Might miss the dinner. I smiled to myself and typed back. No problem. I've sent a car to bring you to the airport. You'll be flying with me. There was a long pause before her response appeared. On your company jet? Unless you'd prefer economy on Air France, I replied. Another pause, then simply, I'll be there in 30. I set the phone down, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me, the part that still remembered every cutting remark, every dismissive glance, every time Victoria had undermined my confidence, wanted her to see exactly what I'd accomplished. Wanted her to sit in my private jet, attend my keynote speech, watch investors and entrepreneurs alike seek my approval and advice. But another part, quieter but persistent, wondered if any of it would matter, if anything I'd achieved would ever be enough to change the way my family saw me. An hour later, Victoria arrived, looking slightly flustered as she was escorted onto the plane by my driver. She paused in the doorway, taking in the cream leather seats, polished wood tables, and the discreet Luminary logo emblazoned on the wall. Welcome aboard, I said, gesturing to the seat across from me. Drink? Scotch, she said, setting her carry-on in the overhead compartment. Neat. As the flight attendant prepared her drink, Victoria settled into the seat, looking around with barely concealed amazement. This is not what I expected. What did you expect? I asked, genuinely curious. She accepted the scotch from the attendant with a murmured thanks. I don't know. When Father mentioned you had a company jet, I assumed it was an exaggeration or some kind of fractional ownership arrangement. Fully owned, I clarified. It made financial sense once we expanded to Europe and Asia. Victoria took a long sip of her scotch. Your company really is doing that well? Better, I said simply. The Forbes valuation was conservative. The engines hummed to life, and the pilot announced our imminent departure. As we taxied down the runway, Victoria stared out the window, uncharacteristically quiet. You know, she finally said as we lifted into the air, when you turned down Father's offer, I thought you were making the biggest mistake of your life. You made that abundantly clear, I reminded her. I was trying to protect you, she insisted. The startup world is brutal. The failure rate is staggering. I was aware of the statistics. Were you aware that I tried to start a company once? She asked abruptly. I stared at her in surprise. What? When? My second year of law school. A legal tech platform to help people navigate small claims court without an attorney. She swirled the amber liquid in her glass. Father talked me out of it. Said it was too risky, that I was throwing away my legal career before it even started. I had no idea, I said truthfully. Victoria shrugged. I listened to him. Finished law school, joined the firm, followed the safe path. She looked around the luxurious cabin. And now I'm flying to Paris on my little sister's private jet. We sat in silence for a moment, the implications of her words hanging between us. It wasn't about you, she continued quietly. When I said those things about your business, it was about me, about the choice I didn't have the courage to make. I studied her face, searching for signs of insincerity or manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion and something that looked surprisingly like regret. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Victoria finished her scotch and set the glass aside. Because sitting in this jet, flying to watch you deliver a keynote at one of the most prestigious tech conferences in the world, makes it rather difficult to maintain the fiction that you were wrong and I was right. I wasn't sure how to respond. For years, I'd imagined this moment, Victoria finally acknowledging my success, admitting she'd been wrong. But now that it was happening, it felt hollow somehow, like winning a game no one else knew we were playing. You should get some rest, I said finally. It's a long flight, and the dinner tomorrow will go late. Victoria nodded, reclining her seat. Wake me when we're over the Atlantic? Of course. I agreed, turning back to my keynote notes. As the plane reached cruising altitude, I glanced over at Victoria, who had already drifted off to sleep. The sister who had once told me I was going nowhere was now accompanying me on my private jet to Paris, where I would deliver the keynote address at a global technology summit. The success I'd achieved hadn't been about proving her wrong. It had been about believing in myself when no one else did, about seeing possibilities where others saw only risk, about having the courage to follow my vision even when the path was uncertain. But as I watched the clouds pass beneath us, I realized that perhaps the greatest victory wasn't in the jet or the company valuation or the keynote speech. Perhaps it was in this moment of honesty between sisters, this first tentative step toward healing a rift that had seemed unbridgeable. I turned back to my speech, making a few final edits. Tomorrow, I would stand before the leaders of the technology world and share my journey from rejection to success. And Victoria would be there to witness it, not as an adversary, but as family. The private jet touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, just as the sun was setting over Paris. Through the window, I could see the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance, a constellation of possibilities. Victoria had woken up about an hour before landing and was now scrolling through emails on her phone, occasionally glancing out at the runway. Cars waiting, I said as we taxied to the private terminal. We'll go straight to the hotel to freshen up before dinner. Victoria nodded, gathering her things. Who else will be at this dinner? Potential investors, a few of our portfolio companies expanding into European markets, some tech journalists, I replied, checking my own messages. Around 20 people total. The customs process was expedited for private jet passengers, and within 30 minutes, we were settled in a sleek black Mercedes, heading toward the city center. Paris glittered beyond the tinted windows, the Eiffel Tower illuminated against the darkening sky. I haven't been to Paris since that family trip when you were in high school, Victoria commented, watching the city slide by. Remember how you insisted on visiting every single tech startup in the city instead of going to the Louvre with the rest of us? I smiled at the memory. Father was so annoyed. But I discovered 3 companies on that trip that later went public. Should have invested when I had the chance. You were always obsessed, Victoria said, but there was no malice in her tone now. Even then. Our driver navigated through the evening traffic, eventually pulling up to the Four Seasons George versus. As we stepped out of the car, Victoria paused, taking in the elegant facade of the hotel. "This is where we're staying?" she asked. "Luminary maintains a suite here for business trips," I explained as the doorman welcomed us and staff rushed to handle our luggage. "It's convenient for meetings in the financial district." Victoria followed me through the opulent lobby, past the magnificent floral arrangements and gleaming marble floors. The hotel manager greeted me by name, escorting us personally to the elevator. "Miss Harlow, everything has been prepared according to your preferences," he assured me. "Your dinner reservations at L'Oiseau Blanc have been confirmed for 8 o'clock, and the conference room is ready for your morning meeting." "Thank you, Philippe," I replied. "This is my sister, Victoria. She'll be in the adjacent suite." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly at the word suite, but she maintained her composure, offering a polite smile to the manager. Once we were alone in the elevator, she turned to me. "All this just seems so excessive?" I supplied. "I was going to say surreal," she corrected. 7 years ago, you were living in that tiny apartment with roommates, eating ramen noodles and working until 3 a.m. on business plans no one would read." The elevator doors opened directly into the hotel's royal suite, revealing a stunning space of over 2,500 square feet with panoramic views of the city. Victoria's suite, while smaller, was connected through an adjoining door. "You have 2 hours before we need to leave for dinner," I told her as a staff member showed her to her suite. "The car will be waiting downstairs at 7:45. After she'd gone, I walked to the windows of my suite, looking out at the Paris skyline. From here I could see the Grand Palais, where I would deliver my keynote speech in 2 days. The venue where industry leaders would gather to hear me, Olivia Harlow, the girl who was going nowhere, share my vision for the future of technology investment. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel at bringing Victoria to witness all this was more complicated than I'd anticipated. Her admission on the plane had shifted something between us, turned what I'd imagined as a triumphant moment of vindication into something more nuanced. As I unpacked my clothes for the week, my phone buzzed with a text from James Chen. "Looking forward to our follow-up meeting when you return. Rachel's due diligence team has been incredibly thorough." I smiled, typing back, "Thoroughness is how we've avoided bad investments. If your technology is as promising as it appears, you'll appreciate our process." His response came quickly. "Absolutely. By the way, it's good to see you again after all these years. You've built something remarkable, Olivia." I set the phone down without replying, unsure how to navigate the personal and professional boundaries of our potential business relationship. Instead, I turned my attention to preparing for the dinner, selecting a simple but elegant black dress that projected exactly the image I wanted: successful, confident, in control. At precisely 7:45, Victoria and I met in the lobby. She'd changed into a midnight blue cocktail dress, her blonde hair now swept into an elegant updo. For a moment I saw us as others might, two successful professional women, similar enough to be clearly sisters but distinct in our own ways. "You look nice," I offered as we walked to the waiting car. "So do you," she replied. "That dress probably costs more than my first car." I laughed. "Definitely more than mine. Remember that rusted Volkswagen I drove in college? The one that broke down on the Golden Gate Bridge during rush hour?" Victoria smiled at the memory. "Father was livid about having to send a tow truck. He made me pay him back for every penny," I recalled as we slid into the back seat of the Mercedes. "With interest." "He was trying to teach you financial responsibility," Victoria said, then paused, "though I suppose that lesson took root more thoroughly than he intended." The restaurant was located on the top floor of the Peninsula Hotel, offering spectacular views of the Eiffel Tower. As we were escorted to the private dining room I'd reserved, I could feel eyes following us, hear the whispered recognition from other diners. The room was already half full when we arrived, conversations flowing between investors and entrepreneurs in multiple languages. I moved through the space with practiced ease, introducing Victoria to key players in the European tech scene, watching with a mixture of amusement and pride as she seamlessly adopted her networking persona. "Ms. Harlow, what an honor to finally meet you," said a tall, distinguished man with a German accent, reaching for my hand. Ludwig Schmidt, Horizon Ventures. Your reputation precedes you. Mr. Schmidt, thank you for coming, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. This is my sister, Victoria Harlow, a partner-track attorney at Hayes & Winthrop in New York. Victoria's eyebrow quirked slightly at my generous inflation of her title, but she smiled and engaged Schmidt in conversation about European data privacy regulations, a subject I knew she'd recently handled for a client. As dinner progressed, I observed Victoria from across the table, noting how quickly she'd adapted to this environment, how effortlessly she contributed to discussions about technology investment, legal implications of AI development, and market expansion strategies. Despite her earlier dismissal of my career path, she'd clearly kept herself informed about the industry. Your sister is quite impressive, remarked Sophie Durand, the CEO of a French fintech company in my portfolio, as Victoria debated the finer points of international patent law with an Italian investor. You must have grown up in a household that valued strong women. I smiled diplomatically. We were certainly encouraged to excel. By the time dessert was served, several potential deals were being discussed around the table, business cards exchanged, follow-up meetings scheduled. Victoria had collected at least a dozen new contacts, potential clients for her firm. The dinner had accomplished exactly what I'd intended professionally, though the personal dynamics remained complex. As the evening wound down, Victoria and I found ourselves momentarily alone, standing by the window overlooking the illuminated Eiffel Tower. Thank you for including me tonight, she said quietly. This was educational. How so? I asked, sipping my espresso. I've been representing tech companies for years, but always from the legal side, she explained. I never really understood how the investment ecosystem worked, how these relationships form and evolve. And now? She turned to face me fully. Now I understand why you were so determined to be part of it. The energy in this room, the sense of building something that didn't exist before, it's intoxicating. It is, I agreed. That's what I couldn't make you or Father understand back then. I wasn't just rejecting his plan for me. I was running towards something I believed in. Victoria was quiet for a moment. He follows your career, you know. Has a Google alert set up for your name and your company. I nearly choked on my espresso. Father knows how to set up a Google alert? His assistant does it for him, she clarified with a small smile. He has the articles printed out, keeps them in a folder in his desk. You're making that up, I said, unable to imagine our stern, disapproving father secretly tracking my success. I'm not, she insisted. I've seen it. He'll never admit it, but he's proud of you, Olivia, in his own way. I didn't know how to respond to that. The idea that my father, who had coldly informed me that I was on my own if I rejected his career plan for me, had been silently monitoring my journey was difficult to process. It's getting late, I said finally. I have an early meeting tomorrow before the summit preparations begin. Victoria nodded, understanding my need to retreat from this unexpected revelation. Of course. The car ride back to the hotel was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. The dynamic between us had shifted again, becoming something neither of us quite knew how to navigate. What time is your keynote the day after tomorrow? Victoria asked as we reached the hotel. 11 a.m., I replied. But there are panel discussions and networking events throughout the day. I'd like to attend, she said. If that's all right with you. I studied her face in the dim light of the car. Why? Victoria sighed. Because I've spent 7 years dismissing what you do without ever really understanding it. Because maybe it's time I actually saw you in your element instead of judging from a distance. I'll have Marcos arrange a VIP pass for you, I said after a moment. It will give you access to all the sessions and the reception afterward. Thank you, she said simply. Back in my suite, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine, trying to make sense of the day's developments. This wasn't how I'd imagined this trip would unfold. I'd expected Victoria to remain the antagonist in my success story, the doubter proven wrong. Instead, she was becoming something more complicated, a sister with her own regrets and reconsiderations. My phone buzzed with an email from Rachel, updating me on the due diligence process for Helix Health. The preliminary findings were promising. James Chen's technology appeared to be everything he'd claimed and possibly more. The potential applications extended beyond cardiac care into neurological prediction and early cancer detection. I wrote back instructing her to move forward with the next phase of evaluation and to prepare term sheet options for when I returned. If everything checked out, Helix could become one of Luminary's most significant investments to date. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of my suite. I went through my usual routine, workout, shower, breakfast, while reviewing the day's schedule, before heading to my first meeting with European investors interested in participating in Luminary's next fund. The day passed in a blur of meetings, preparation sessions for my keynote, and media interviews. I caught occasional glimpses of Victoria, who had decided to explore Paris, sending me photos from the Louvre and Montmartre with brief, almost tentative messages. "Remember when you insisted this view was overrated?" she texted from the steps of Sacré-Cœur. "You might have been wrong about that one." I smiled, typing back, "I was 16 and determined to be contrary." The view is spectacular. By evening, I was back in my hotel suite, rehearsing my keynote speech one final time. The presentation covered my journey from rejected entrepreneur to successful investor, but framed as a series of lessons about recognizing overlooked potential in both people and technologies. I was just finishing when there was a knock at the door. Victoria stood in the hallway, holding a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Thought you might need to unwind before the big speech tomorrow," she offered. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. "Just finished my final run-through." "Want a practice audience?" she asked, setting the champagne and glasses on the coffee table. "You want to hear my speech?" Victoria shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Why not? Consider it research for my firm. We're always looking to better understand the venture capital landscape." I watched as she opened the champagne with practiced ease, pouring 2 glasses. "All right," I agreed, picking up my tablet. "But I want honest feedback." "When have I ever offered anything else?" she asked dryly, settling onto the sofa. For the next 45 minutes, I delivered my keynote as if I were standing on the Grand Palais stage. Victoria listened attentively, occasionally nodding or raising an eyebrow, but mostly just absorbing the content without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Well?" I prompted. "Honest feedback, remember?" "It's good," she said slowly. "Very good. But what?" She took a sip of champagne. "You're holding back. The speech talks about recognizing potential and seizing opportunities, but it doesn't really capture the courage it took to do what you did." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you make it sound like a rational business decision, like anyone with the right information would have made the same choice," Victoria explained. "But that's not what happened. You faced universal rejection, from investors, from our family, from everyone except Alex. You had every reason to give up, and you didn't. That's not just about recognizing potential, that's about having extraordinary conviction." I set my tablet down, surprised by her insight. "You think I should make it more personal?" "I think you should be honest about how hard it was," she replied. "About the nights you probably cried yourself to sleep wondering if you'd made a terrible mistake. About the times you must have been tempted to give up and come crawling back to father's firm like I predicted you would." I stared at her, suddenly seeing the sister who had once known me better than anyone else, before career paths and life choices had driven us apart. "I was terrified every day for the first 3 years," I admitted quietly. "I would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, convinced I was one bad decision away from total failure." "Put that in your speech," Victoria urged. "Not to be vulnerable for vulnerability's sake, but because that's the real lesson here. Success isn't just about being smart enough to see opportunities. It's about being brave enough to pursue them despite the fear." I picked up my tablet again, making notes. "When did you become so insightful about entrepreneurship?" Victoria laughed softly. "I've spent 7 years representing entrepreneurs, while secretly wondering what would have happened if I'd had your courage. Gives you a certain perspective." We stayed up late into the night, refining my speech, sharing stories from the years we'd spent apart, cautiously rebuilding a bridge neither of us had realized we wanted to cross. By the time Victoria returned to her own suite, My keynote had evolved into something more authentic and powerful than it had been before. The morning of the summit arrived with clear skies and a buzz of anticipation. The Grand Palais had been transformed into a technology showcase, with companies from around the world demonstrating their latest innovations. As a keynote speaker, I had access to a private preparation room where I could gather my thoughts before taking the stage. Victoria had texted that she was already in the audience, seated in the VIP section near the front. The auditorium would be filled with over 2,000 attendees, with thousands more watching the live stream globally. It was the largest audience I'd ever addressed. 5 minutes, Ms. Harlow, a stage manager informed me, poking his head into the preparation room. I took a deep breath, smoothing the lapels of my tailored blazer. The outfit had been carefully chosen, professional but distinctive, a deep burgundy suit that would stand out against the stage backdrop. My hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, makeup understated but flawless. "Ready?" asked Marcos, who had been with me all morning, handling last-minute details and keeping potential distractions at bay. "Ready," I confirmed, picking up my tablet and water bottle. The walk to the stage felt surreal, time simultaneously stretching and compressing. I could hear the introduction being given in French and English, highlighting my company's growth and investment success. Revolutionized the approach to early-stage technology investment, with a portfolio now valued at over $3 billion. Please welcome to the stage the founder and CEO of Luminary Tech Ventures, Olivia Harlow. Applause thundered through the auditorium as I stepped onto the stage, the lights momentarily blinding. As my eyes adjusted, I caught sight of Victoria in the front row, watching intently, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something that looked almost like pride. I set my tablet on the podium, but instead of immediately looking down at my prepared remarks, I gazed out at the audience, making eye contact with as many people as I could. 7 years ago, I began, my voice strong and clear through the microphone. I was told I was going nowhere. The audience quieted, sensing this wasn't the standard keynote opening. I had just turned down a position at my father's prestigious law firm to pursue my dream of creating a different kind of venture capital company, one that would recognize potential in overlooked founders in technologies others dismissed as impractical or premature. I glanced briefly at Victoria, who gave me a small nod of encouragement. The response was universal rejection. Investors said I was too young, too inexperienced, too female to succeed in the cutthroat world of venture capital. Family members told me I was throwing away a promising legal career for a fantasy. I stepped away from the podium, moving across the stage with deliberate confidence. One particular critic, who happens to be in the audience today, said I was, and I quote, "going nowhere." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Victoria's lips curved in a self-deprecating smile. "Well," I continued, gesturing to the grand space around us, "nowhere turns out to be a pretty interesting place." The audience erupted in applause and laughter. As it subsided, I shifted into the heart of my speech, sharing not just the business lessons I'd learned, but the personal journey of doubt, fear, and determination that had brought me to this stage. "When you're told you're going nowhere," I continued, my voice resonating through the Grand Palais, "you have two choices. You can believe it and surrender your dreams, or you can transform nowhere into everywhere through sheer determination." The audience hung on every word, 2,000 faces fixed on mine. I could feel the energy in the room, the electric connection that happens when a story touches something universal. "The journey from rejection to success isn't linear," I said, moving confidently across the stage. "It's a series of small victories interspersed with crushing setbacks. It's waking up at 3 a.m. wondering if you've made a catastrophic mistake with your life. It's watching peers climb traditional career ladders while you're still trying to build your first rung." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room. "But it's also the incomparable thrill of seeing your vision materialize, of witnessing a technology you funded save lives or transform industries, of creating opportunities for brilliant minds who, like you, were once told their ideas were impossible." For the next 40 minutes, I shared specific stories from Luminary's growth, the first entrepreneur I'd backed when everyone else had passed, the near bankruptcy we'd narrowly avoided in year 2, the breakthrough investment that had put us on the map. I wove in lessons about recognizing hidden potential, about the courage to bet on the seemingly impossible, about the power of believing in yourself when no one else does. Throughout the speech, I occasionally caught Victoria's eye. She remained attentive, nodding at key points, her expression thoughtful. This wasn't the triumphant moment of vindication I'd once imagined. Instead, it felt like something more meaningful. A shared recognition of different paths taken, different choices made, different lessons learned. As I moved toward my conclusion, I stepped away from the prepared remarks entirely, speaking directly from the heart. Success isn't measured by proving doubters wrong, I said, my voice softening. Though I admit, arriving in Paris on my private jet with someone who once told me I was going nowhere does have a certain poetic justice. Laughter rippled through the audience again. Victoria shook her head with a rueful smile. But true success is about proving yourself right. About having the courage to listen to that voice inside you that says, "This is possible," even when every external voice is shouting that it's not. I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, making eye contact with young entrepreneurs scattered throughout the audience. So if you're at that crossroads now, if you're facing the choice between the safe path and the dream that won't let you go, know this. The journey will be harder than you can imagine. The doubts will be louder than you expect. The failures will hurt more than you think possible. I paused, letting the words sink in. But on the other side of that struggle is the profound satisfaction of creating something that exists because you refused to quit, of building a future you were once told was impossible, of standing on stages like this one, not to gloat about proving others wrong, but to extend a hand to those still climbing. The conclusion of my speech was met with a standing ovation. As applause thundered through the Grand Palais, I caught Victoria's eye one last time. She was on her feet with everyone else, a complex mixture of emotions playing across her face: pride, regret, and something that looked like newfound respect. The remainder of the summit passed in a blur of panel discussions, networking events, and media interviews. By late afternoon, I was seated in a private lounge area, taking a rare moment to decompress between commitments. "That was quite a speech," said a familiar voice. I looked up to see Victoria standing in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thanks," I replied, accepting the cup she offered. "Coffee with an extra shot, right?" "You remember," she said, sounding surprised. "Some habits never change." I gestured for her to sit. "What did you think? Honestly." Victoria settled into the chair across from me, considering the question. "I think it was the most honest I've ever heard you be about your journey. No sugarcoating, no corporate jargon, just raw truth about how hard it's been, and why it was worth it." I sipped my coffee, letting her words sink in. "The funny thing is, I wouldn't have given that speech if you hadn't pushed me last night. I would have delivered the polished, sanitized version." "Well, I've always been good at pushing your buttons," she said with a small smile. "True, though usually not in productive ways." Victoria's smile faded. "I owe you an apology, Olivia. Not just for doubting you, but for actively trying to undermine your confidence. For telling you that you were making a mistake instead of supporting your choice." "Why did you?" I asked quietly. "Really?" She stared into her coffee cup for a long moment. "Because you had the courage to do what I couldn't. To defy father. To risk failure. To choose the uncertain path. Every time I looked at you building your company, I saw the road not taken for myself. You could have taken it," I pointed out. "You still could." Victoria shook her head. "I'm not like you, Olivia. I don't have your tolerance for risk, your ability to get knocked down and keep getting back up. I'm good at what I do. Excellent even. But I need the structure, the established path." "You're selling yourself short," I said. "The way you handled yourself at the dinner last night? Those investors were impressed by your knowledge, your confidence. Several of them asked me about you afterward." She looked up, surprise evident on her face. "Really? Really?" In fact, I hesitated, then decided to follow the instinct that had been forming since watching her network with my colleagues. "I've been thinking about something." Luminary is expanding our legal department to handle the European expansion. We need someone who understands both US and European regulations, someone who can navigate complex international deals. Victoria's eyebrows rose. Are you offering me a job? I'm suggesting a possibility, I clarified. Not working for me directly. That would probably kill us both, but heading up our European legal operations. Building your own team, your own department, but with the resources and reach of Luminary behind you. She set her coffee down, looking stunned. You can't be serious. Why not? You're qualified, you already know our business model, and after last night, you have connections with half our portfolio companies. Because we've spent the last 7 years barely speaking to each other, Victoria pointed out. Because I've been openly dismissive of your career choices. Because I'm the last person you should want to bring into your company. Or maybe you're exactly the person I need, I countered. Someone who will challenge me, who won't be intimidated by my position, who understands both the legal landscape and the family dynamics that shaped me as a leader. Victoria was quiet, processing the unexpected offer. I'd need to think about it. Of course, I agreed. Take all the time you need. But consider this. What if the reason you've been so critical of my path isn't just because you didn't take it yourself? What if it's because some part of you has always wanted to be part of building something new, but on your own terms? Before she could respond, my phone buzzed with a reminder. I have to get to the closing panel, I said, standing. But think about it. We're flying back tomorrow afternoon. You don't have to decide before then. The remainder of the summit was a whirlwind of commitments. The closing panel discussion on the future of AI investment, a private dinner with European tech leaders, late-night calls with my team in New York about ongoing deals, including the promising developments with James Chen's Helix Health. It was nearly midnight when I returned to my hotel suite, exhausted but exhilarated by the day's success. My keynote had already been featured in several technology publications, with commentators noting its unusual personal tone and inspirational message. I kicked off my heels and poured a glass of wine, carrying it to the window to look out at the Paris skyline. The Eiffel Tower was illuminated against the night sky, a beacon of light in the darkness. 7 years ago, I'd been a rejected entrepreneur with nothing but a business plan and unwavering determination. Now I was here, having achieved more than even I had dared to dream. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Victoria stood in the hallway, still dressed in the outfit she'd worn to the summit, though she'd swapped her heels for hotel slippers. Can we talk? She asked. I stepped aside to let her in. Wine? Please, she replied, moving to the window where I'd been standing. I poured a second glass and joined her, both of us gazing out at the city in silence for a moment. I've been thinking about your offer, Victoria finally said. And? She turned to face me. Why would you want to work with me after everything? The truth, Olivia. I considered the question carefully. Because despite our differences, I've always respected your legal mind. Because I've seen how you operate in my world over the past 2 days, and you're a natural. And because maybe it's time we stopped defining our relationship by the choices that divided us, and started exploring what we might build together. Victoria took a sip of her wine. I'd have conditions. I smiled. Of course you would. I'd want to build my own team, set up the department according to my vision. No interference. Within budget constraints, I countered. And I'd want a clear path to equity partnership, not just a salary. Reasonable, if you meet performance metrics. She raised an eyebrow. And I'd need you to promise that we'd keep our professional and personal relationships separate. No bringing family dynamics into business decisions. That goes both ways, I said firmly. No using business disagreements as ammunition in personal matters. Victoria nodded slowly. It would be a risk. For both of us. Life's full of risks, I replied. The question is which ones are worth taking. She was quiet for a long moment, then set her wineglass down decisively. I want to see a formal offer when we get back to New York. Salary structure, Equity options, department budget, reporting lines. Everything spelled out clearly. Of course. I agreed. I wouldn't expect anything less. And I'll need to give my firm proper notice. At least a month. We can wait, I said, realizing with surprise that this was actually happening. My sister, who had once told me I was going nowhere, was considering joining the company I'd built, despite her doubts. Victoria picked up her wine again, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. Father is going to have an aneurysm when he hears about this. I laughed. Probably. Though, according to you, he secretly follows my career, so maybe he'll be less surprised than we think. He follows your career, she corrected. He never imagined I'd join you. Neither did I admitted. But sometimes the most unlikely partnerships turn out to be the most successful. Look at some of our portfolio companies, founders who met as adversaries and ended up building something remarkable together. Victoria raised her glass in a toast. To unlikely partnerships, then. And to redefining nowhere, I added, clinking my glass against hers. The next morning, as we prepared to depart for the airport, Paris sparkled in the spring sunshine. I'd already been up for hours, handling emails and calls, finalizing details for meetings that would happen upon my return to New York. Your car is ready, Ms. Harlow, Marcos informed me as I completed a call with Rachel about the Helix Health due diligence. And Dr. Chen has requested a meeting first thing Monday morning. Schedule it, I instructed. And make sure the term sheet options are ready for review before then. Victoria emerged from her suite, luggage packed, looking every inch the polished corporate attorney she'd always been. Yet something had shifted in her demeanor, a new lightness perhaps, or a subtle excitement about possibilities she hadn't considered before. Ready? I asked. For the flight, yes, she replied. For everything else, ask me again in a month. The ride to the airport was comfortable, filled with discussion about practical matters, the timeline for her potential transition, the structure of the European legal department, the challenges of navigating different regulatory environments. You'll need to spend significant time in both Paris and London, I pointed out. Are you ready for that kind of travel schedule? I've been tied to New York for 7 years, Victoria said, gazing out at the passing city. A change of scenery might be exactly what I need. At the private terminal, our luggage was whisked away by efficient staff, and we were escorted directly to the waiting jet. Victoria no longer looked surprised by the luxurious accommodations or the deferential treatment. She'd adapted quickly to this world, as she did to every environment. Once we were airborne, settled into the comfortable leather seats with Paris receding beneath us, Victoria turned to me with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking about what you said in your keynote, she began, about success not being about proving doubters wrong, but about proving yourself right. What about it? I asked. I think that's true for most people, she said carefully. But for you, there was always something more. You weren't just trying to prove yourself right. You were trying to create something meaningful, something that would outlast any personal vindication. I considered her words. Maybe. I certainly wanted to build a company that would make a difference in how innovative technologies are funded and developed. And you have, Victoria acknowledged. The entrepreneurs I met at the summit, the ones your company has funded, they spoke about you with genuine respect, not just for your financial backing, but for your vision, your guidance. That means more to me than the valuation or the press coverage, I admitted, seeing ideas flourish that might otherwise have withered for lack of support. Victoria nodded. I think I understand that better now, why you couldn't take Father's offer, why you had to forge your own path. And I think I understand better why you took the path you did, I replied. Security, structure, clear advancement. Those aren't weaknesses, they're valid priorities. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as the flight continued. Childhood memories, family gossip, stories from our separate lives over the past 7 years. By the time we were approaching New York, something had been repaired between us, though neither of us could have precisely defined what had changed. As the Manhattan skyline came into view, Victoria looked out the window thoughtfully. It looks different from up here, she observed. The city, I mean. You can see patterns you miss when you're down in the streets. Perspective changes everything, I agreed. In business, in family, in life. The jet touched down smoothly at Teterboro Airport, where 2 cars were waiting. One to take me directly to the office for an urgent meeting, the other to take Victoria home. "I'll have the formal offer drawn up by tomorrow," I told her as we prepared to go our separate ways. "Take your time reviewing it. This isn't a decision to rush." Victoria surprised me by pulling me into a brief hug. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for the opportunity, but for not giving up on me even when I gave up on you." "We're sisters," I replied simply. "That doesn't change, regardless of career paths or disagreements." As my car navigated through the familiar streets of Manhattan toward the Luminary offices, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. I'd invited Victoria to Paris to witness my success, to finally prove her wrong about the path I'd chosen. Instead, we'd both discovered something more valuable, the possibility of moving beyond old wounds to create something new. My phone buzzed with a text from James Chen, looking forward to our meeting Monday. "I have some exciting new data to share," I smiled, typing back, "Looking forward to it as well. Bring your A game. If the technology is as promising as it appears, we could be making an announcement soon." The car pulled up to the sleek glass tower that housed Luminary's headquarters. As I stepped out, I gazed up at the building that represented everything I'd built from nothing but determination and vision. 7 years ago, I'd been told I was going nowhere. Now I owned the top 3 floors of one of Manhattan's most prestigious buildings. But the true measure of success wasn't the building, the jet, or even the billion-dollar valuation. It was the knowledge that I'd stayed true to my vision when everyone else doubted it. That I'd created opportunities not just for myself, but for countless entrepreneurs with world-changing ideas. That I'd built something meaningful that would outlast any personal vindication. And now, perhaps, I'd even found a way to bridge the gap with the sister who had once been my harshest critic. Not by forcing her to admit she was wrong, but by inviting her to be part of something right. As I rode the elevator to the executive floor, I composed a message to the Luminary board, outlining my plan to create a European legal department headed by Victoria. I knew some would question bringing family into the business, but I was confident in the decision. Sometimes the people who challenge us most are exactly the ones we need by our side. The next few weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. The formal offer to Victoria was drafted, reviewed, negotiated, and finally accepted. James Chen's Helix Health Technology passed every phase of due diligence with flying colors, resulting in a $25 million investment at a somewhat reduced but still impressive valuation. The European expansion continued apace, with new offices established in Paris, London, and Berlin. And through it all, a new relationship emerged between Victoria and me. Not quite friends yet, but no longer adversaries. Sisters finding our way back to the connection we'd lost. 1 month after our return from Paris, I stood on the helipad atop Luminary's headquarters, waiting as Victoria's helicopter approached from JFK. She'd just returned from London, where she'd been interviewing potential team members for her new department. The helicopter touched down, its rotors slowly coming to a stop. Victoria emerged, briefcase in hand, looking energized despite the transatlantic flight. "Successful trip?" I called over the diminishing roar. "Very," she confirmed as she approached. "I found our European patent specialist and our regulatory compliance lead. Both exceptional." "Excellent," I replied, leading her toward the elevator. Just in time for the Helix announcement next week. We descended to the executive floor, where Marcos had prepared coffee and a light lunch in my office. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread out before us, a concrete jungle we'd both learned to navigate in our own ways. "So," Victoria said, settling into a chair across from my desk, "a private jet to Paris, a helicopter from JFK, and now you're backing a technology that could revolutionize predictive healthcare. You've come a long way from that tiny apartment, and the business plan no one would read." I smiled, remembering the days when success had seemed like an impossible dream. Not bad for someone who was going nowhere. "I was wrong," Victoria admitted, the words coming easier now than they had a month ago. "Spectacularly. completely wrong. And I was wrong to think I needed to prove you wrong, I replied. What matters isn't what anyone else thinks of your path. It's whether you have the courage to stay on it when it gets difficult. Victoria raised her coffee cup in a toast. To courage, then. Yours for taking the leap, and mine for finally being willing to follow where you've led. As we clinked cups, I felt a sense of completion, of a circle finally closing. The journey from rejection to success hadn't been about proving Victoria or my father or any of the early investors wrong. It had been about proving to myself that with enough determination, nowhere could indeed become everywhere. And now, seated across from the sister who had once dismissed my dreams, planning the future of a company valued at over $1 billion, I knew that the greatest revenge against those who doubt you isn't proving them wrong. It's living so fully in your purpose that their doubts become irrelevant. 7 years ago, Victoria had told me I was going nowhere. Today, we were building an international company together, backing technologies that would change lives, creating opportunities for innovators around the world. Nowhere had turned out to be exactly where I needed to go. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.